Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing the repaint of a little model rabbit. I don't actually remember when I got this. I've had it for a little while though, and I actually have multiple of this particular Schleich little figurine. And I thought it'd be really fun to repaint it as my character Lunar from my comic Lunar the Moon Rabbit. So let's get into that. The three colors that I mainly used were Greek Tile, Indigo, and Wedding Cake, two of which were the blue, and then the Wedding Cake was the white. And I also used a handful of brushes that I actually had on hand that were a gift from my sister. They're just pretty basic brushes. This one is a Royal Majestic, and I used a few different sizes of them, but it was mainly just a couple of really small fine tip ones and then a thicker, more broad brush. So now that we've looked at all the tools, let's get started. I actually didn't wind up doing primer or anything. I sort of used white as my base. I tried to cover the entire figurine with a thin coat of white, and I believe I actually do multiple coats of white here, but I realized as I started putting on the white that the white I was using was a much more true white than the base color of the actual figurine. They used more of an off-white for the base material, and as I started applying coats, I realized I would probably need to do more than just one coat, because for one, they used a very pigmented and strong black, and also I did not like how their particular off-white base looked, and it just didn't match with what I was seeing. One problem that I realized a couple coats in, actually, was that the black paint that they used, it doesn't seem it at first, but even if it's just one coat of the black on top of the base, you know, sort of material that they used, it did actually leave shapes. And, you know, that makes sense, of course. It's paint, and it's bound to pile up a little bit. And right off the bat, I was already accidentally touching it with my fingers, as you probably saw. The problem is that the model is just so tiny that you have to do the whole thing at once, and there's no good way to grasp it as soon as you put the wet paint on it, and I kept fumbling my fingers a little bit and setting them right back in the paint. I'm not exactly new to repaints and whatnot, but I'm also not the most skilled there is. It's more of like a hobby thing for me. I've always loved the idea of customizing my own action figures and dolls, and I've done a few repaints and customizing jobs, but nothing really big. Things like repainting little models like this, especially the Schleich models, those are my favorite little animal models, and I have quite a few of them to use as art reference. I actually have tons of them in a drawer right by my desk, and they're so beautifully made and usually have really nice paint jobs that I just love looking at them. They're amazing for reference, and I would highly recommend them if you have a particular character who is an animal or something and you need reference for them. I had 2 or 3 little rabbits that I used as reference for Lunar, and they were super helpful anytime I was sitting at my desk and didn't have my rabbit around to actually reference my live rabbit, because they're very anatomically correct for the most part. A couple have some funky little things with them, but generally they're really good sculpts. I got to a point here where I genuinely didn't know how to go about it, because I had already painted the ears most of the way, and it was just getting really hard to find a good hold on the model. I will say that this particular sculpt actually does have a slight inconsistency on the face, and I've noticed it on both of the small rabbits that I have, actually, of this particular sculpt. One of the cheeks is a bit more pointed than the other, if that makes sense. It's really hard to explain, but when you actually see the model in person, you can notice it a bit more. It's not a major issue though, and it wasn't enough that I actually felt the need to sand it down or edit the model, but it is a slight inconsistency. It's just a little not symmetrical. In hindsight, I probably should have painted this and done one coat on the body, let it dry, one coat on the head, let that dry, and so on and so forth, but I really wanted this to just be like an afternoon project and not something that would span into the course of a couple of days or something, so I really wanted to get as much paint on every layer as I could. And with that, the first coat of white is just about done. So I think I actually skip over the second coat of white. I'm not sure though. Here's how it looked after the first coat. As you can tell, there's still a lot of black showing through, and I definitely did not get every spot on it. Here's how it looked after the second coat. Looking a little bit better, more opaque, and a little bit creepier. If I had just painted it in the eyes red, it would have been albino. Granted, albinos are really adorable. We used to raise mice, and we actually had quite a few albino mice, and unfortunately there was some kind of issue with them, so the mentality of albino animals being like aggressive or murderous or something was kind of accurate with some of our mice. They were not right in the head. We still loved them though, and it was more of like a, you toss the food in and you watch them eat and you watch them be cute, but you can't actually handle them. I don't know. We usually had pretty well bred mice though, so it's hard to say exactly what made them aggressive when all of the others weren't. I'm sure there's some kind of explanation for that, but who knows. Anyways, here I start mixing up some really light sort of powder blues to use as the base, and I immediately realize that I am way off camera, so from here on out I think I do a better job staying in view. I try to keep these coats of blue really light, both in color and in coverage, because I know that a lot of thin coats are actually better than one thick coat. You're bound to get smoother results that way. Although, to be fair, I was still rushing it just a smidge, but then I went ahead and I colored the ear with a bit more of a darker tone, but immediately decided to dilute that a bit with some white. One of the mistakes that I found myself making a lot was not mixing enough of each color. I would constantly have to remix and try to get my quantities the same, when I really should have mixed more of the color that I knew I was going to be using a lot of all at once so that it matched. But, you know, I'm just gonna keep saying it was just a fun afternoon project, so I wasn't thinking about it as much as I probably could have. I also decided to do this after I had actually finished the comic. So I finished production at the end of summer, and I think it was within a week or so of finishing the actual comic. Then I decided to go ahead and paint this model, which it would have made more sense if I had decided to paint it while I was still making the comic so that I had a more accurate reference of Lunar herself. But, you know, it is what it is, and I still love having it, and I really hope to customize more figures and possibly dolls or something of my characters, because that's just super fun to have. I have a couple of maquette heads that I made, and I think I showed them in a monthly vlog that I made. I say monthly, but I haven't posted one since you know, beginning of summer, I think. I wanted them to be a monthly thing, but I got super busy and just wasn't able to make it happen. But I would love to do more long sort of studio vlogs, and I've recorded a ton of footage. I just need to find time to edit it all together. As you can see, the ears don't quite match here, so I'm mixing up some darker paint to see about fixing that. I didn't think to record it whenever I did it, but back before Lep actually got introduced to the comic, I made a figurine of him. Well, I repainted one. I don't think that one was a Schleich brand, but it was a small model hair that's really close in size to the one that I used for Lunar, which doesn't exactly work for the actual scale of these two because Lep is bigger, because he's based off of an Arctic hare, and Lunar is based off of a very small domesticated dwarf rabbit. So Lep should be a bit bigger, but unfortunately when you're ordering models, there's no way to really know what size they're going to be until they get there. You can read all of the sizing information, but it's usually just luck of the draw and a wild guess. I'm not unhappy that their scale is off though, because it means that they're really easy to store and they fit in my hand super easy. So either way, I'm pretty happy with it. My mixing was really sloppy, as you could probably tell. But now I'm going in and painting the sort of edging around her tail. This is one thing that I did not think about when I was first starting repainting this, is that her tail is not completely blue. The outermost edges where the top and the bottom fur meet, that's what's blue. It's not the whole tail. Which that was very tricky to paint, but I think it turned out okay. Now I start going in with some darker colors for the inside of the ear to give a bit more of like a shading effect. That's something about painting on smaller things like action figures or miniatures, is that you actually have to sort of help the shading and lighting along a bit. It seems like if it's a three-dimensional object, you wouldn't have to do that, and that it'll naturally cast its own shadows on itself, but in some things, if there's little fine details and crevices like on the ear or where the legs attach to the rest of the body, sometimes you have to help it along a little bit and darken it up. I struggled a surprising amount getting the face quite right. The muzzle just gave me fits over and over again, and I was really sweating it whenever it got to the eyes. At this point, I probably should have switched to a smaller brush, but, you know, I made it work. I don't have the best setup for washing brushes, so I tried to just do as much as possible all at once with just the same brush. And there I go off camera again. Sometimes you just can't help it, especially when you're working on something really tiny and really detailed. You just have to get, like, way up in the face. I'm hoping to set up a better filming rig for my desk at some point, but that's not something that's on the immediate agenda, so I'm just making do with sort of a janky tripod and iPod setup. Because yes, I record most of my live action stuff on an iPad or my iPod Touch, actually. They're they're not too bad. They record 1080, but it's not a super high resolution 1080. And the colors aren't always the best. But my computer setup just is not great for working with super high resolution footage, so using things like, I have a Canon T3i that I'm able to use. It's actually my parents', but they let me use it when I want to. The footage that thing records is beautiful, but it's really high resolution, and usually the video files are just a smidge too much for me to work with. Here, I actually went and got a smaller brush for once. Look at me go! I decided to use a smaller one for the eyes just because they're so tiny. And even with this tiny brush, I actually overshot in a couple little spots, but I made it work. It turned out alright. In the end, things usually do turn out. Most of the time when I'm doing stuff like this, I don't tend to record it, just because this is gonna sound kind of funny, but I love making content and I love sharing it with people, but at the same time, sometimes you want things to stay sort of a hobby, you know? And that's how I feel about, like, customizing dolls or, you know, repainting figurines. That's the kind of stuff that I love showing the end product, but the process of actually making it is usually a lot of hands-on work, and I want to keep it sort of like a diversion for me, not necessarily work, if that makes sense. So I probably won't be doing a lot more videos like this in the future. That's not to say I won't do any, but most of the time, like if I'm doing something like cleaning up those maquette heads that I mentioned earlier, I would love to sand those down and paint them so that I have like a really accurate colored model of the characters to use for reference. I don't think I'll probably record that. I thought about it, but I've sort of felt more like doing that privately so that I can really, you know, get it way up in my face like I keep doing here and just work on it myself so that if I make mistakes, I don't feel weird about it because I don't feel like there are people watching. Because that's something about the creative process that I feel like can get lost pretty easily. And I'll just pop in real quick and say that I'm using some white here to clean up some of the edges and places that I overshot. But anyways, going back to what I was saying, I feel like there's sort of almost this mindset that when you're doing a creative project, whenever you're recording it, that it feels supernatural, but no, at least for me, and for a couple of people I've talked to, when someone's watching, you don't create in the same way as you do when you're just working alone and in private and there's no one there to spectate. And I kind of miss that sometimes whenever I'm doing a lot of work like YouTube videos or working on comics, is that I know that someone's going to see what I'm making. But if I do something like repainting a miniature, I can do that in private and it's my choice if I want to share that or not. And I feel less pressured to make a good result. And I know there's always the choice to not share what I'm working on, but in the end I usually share most of what I make because it's just so exciting to make things. Like, that's why I do so many different things, why I make so many comics and novels and just all the stuff that I do, is because I love making things and sharing them with people and showing what I can do. This last little bit of detail that I'm doing with her eyes is actually a golden acrylic, which I believe that was last Christmas. I had applied for a sample box of golden brand acrylics, and they finally sent one out to me and they approved my application, and I was really impressed with how it worked. I don't remember exactly which color this one was. I will put that down in the description, but I highly recommend it. They didn't pay me to do it or anything, but I did get sent the sample box for free just for some feedback, and it was something that I went on their website and applied for. So it wasn't that they contacted me to do. It was that I contacted them and applied for a sample box, but I really liked it, and I actually went and ordered some other stuff from them just because I like their paint so much. But then I went back in with some of the Martha Stewart white paint and added some little shiny dots to her eyes because I don't have a glossy top coat or anything. So it is what it is. And unfortunately, I had to make do adding some little catch lights by myself and not relying on gloss. But here's the finished product. I think it turned out really cute and I'm really happy. She sits on my desk and keeps me company, and I just think that it's really nice. I like it. I hope you enjoyed watching me make it, and I hope to see you next time. Take care and God bless! Oh, and also, if you would like to read Luna and the Moon Rabbit, it actually wrapped up just recently on Webtoon and Tapaz, or you can get the remastered special version on my Gumroad for just about 10 or 12 bucks, I think it is. And I am currently working on getting a paperback version manufactured, but that's sort of going slow, and I will have updates on that soon, hopefully. Thank you again for watching, and God bless!